You're listening to the Precision Shooting Podcast, discussing all aspects of precision and long-range rifle shooting. This episode is brought to you by Impact Dynamics, advanced training for the precision shooter. And now, over to your hosts.
Welcome to the Precision Shooting Podcast. This is episode number 3. I'm Rusty, and with me is Greg.
How you doing?
And also Andrew.
How you going?
Excellent. All right, guys. How's everyone been? Shooting?
Yeah, we had a little bit of a long-range day.
A week and a half ago.
Yeah, that was good.
Good if you're good at reading wind. That was a challenge.
Well, it was a good training day, really, I guess, and that's the whole idea of it. So,
yeah. Certainly. The wind where we were shooting was picking up and then dropping off and going back the other way within seconds of each other. It was something I've not experienced before. It was excellent. I loved it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you mentioned you were watching the crop sort of blowing one way, then circling and blowing the other way. So
one of the training exercises we were doing is I was standing out with a radio and a Kestrel, and I was hundreds of metres away from the guy we were training with, and he was trying to guess the wind of where I was, and I was obviously then confirming it for him. And I saw the crop was, the heads were blowing one way, and then I saw them start spinning, and it felt like something out of a horror film for a moment. And then they started blowing the other way, and it's something that was very, very unique and hadn't seen before, but it was good to see. Yeah, excellent. Greg, did you went shooting, or you tried to?
Yeah, I went to a local property, and although we saw a bit of movement, unfortunately there was no foxes shot. They were pretty much, we accidentally almost dropped on top of each fox, so we sort of startled them, drove onto them.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, they were on the way out each time. But no, there was good movement. I'll get back there soon and hopefully knock a couple over.
Oh, I'm sure you'll get them, mate. Absolutely. Do you want to give us a bit of an update on where you are with your build that we've been talking about?
Yeah, so since last episode, I've committed to a barrel.
Now, I did listen back to last episode, and we're talking like 6 months, 9 months? How long are you waiting?
Yeah, I already have it at home.
You have it?
Yes.
Righto. Who do you know that managed to get you that? Because
well, what I did was I was ideally looking for a heavy varmint profile in 26-inch.
Yep.
In a Bartlam barrel. They did have a Bartlam barrel in heavy varmint profile, but it was 30-inch long. So I went with the 30-inch. They had that in stock. What I was actually after was not in stock. So that was through 7mm.com.au.
Yep, a bit of a shout-out.
Yeah, I think they're in Queensland. But, yeah, really good to deal with.
Excellent.
So, yeah, he sent that down. I committed to that. So
and you had it already. What twist rate did you end up going
I went with the 1 in 8.
So very close to the optimal listed by Berger.
There was an optimal. You could get a barrel in one twist in 7.75, but I'm happy with 1 in 8. That's close enough for me.
That'll do the job.
That'll do the job, and so I'm happy.
I've seen you shoot, mate. It won't be the barrel.
That's true.
So did you end up? Was that barrel fluted, Greg, or was it just straight?
No, just straight varmint.
Yeah.
So the next step will obviously get it fitted, but I think now Christmas is close. I'm a bit low on money, so I've got to get through the Christmas thing. And then I'll probably look at getting the magazine system put on so I know how much overall length I've got to deal with before I get the barrel cut and placed in. So that'll probably be around the January, February time period.
Two things I want to ask you, and I don't know if you want to go into in depth at the moment, but you said 26-inch was what you're going for. How did you arrive there? Or
okay.
Or if we opened a can of worms, mate?
Not really. For those that are subscribed to the Precision Rifle blog, they just put an article up on barrels used in the Precision Rifle series.
Yep.
In that, the predominant barrel length in the top 100 was 26-inch. There was very few above that. There were a few below it that performed quite well, actually, 20 and 22-inch. So there's a really good article that we'll probably talk about later on.
Sure. We can discuss that one next episode.
Yeah, and I haven't committed to a length, but that's just based on that article. That's the sort of length I'm looking at, and we could talk about that maybe on a next week, another show. Or
yeah, sure. Yeah, I think barrels. I mean, we talked about it a little bit last time, but there's certainly heaps more to discuss. So we certainly can probably bring it up again next time. And I guess if you go on 26, you can always bring it down a little bit more if you decide that that's appropriate for what you're doing.
Yep,
absolutely. I think I said we'll go into it further, but the small sort of efficient rounds like what you've selected don't necessarily need a 30 or 32 inch barrel to maximise potential out of them. So again, there's a lot there to discuss, and I think we'll hook into that at probably the next episode a little more. So.
No worries.
And something else that's got my attention from what you said was about magazines. Now, I don't want to necessarily get into it now, but I think that's probably another episode in a couple of eps time that perhaps we can talk about different magazine systems, because you're obviously going through that at the moment.
Yeah, and myself, I don't know a lot about magazine systems, so it'd be good to maybe ask the questions here rather than externally, and then any listeners can benefit from the sort of decision-making process, I guess.
Yeah, excellent. So, I mean, look, the common ones are going to be AI, I guess, but there are other options out there, and whether or not that's going to suit you or what you're doing.
Yeah, and just how much overall length they give as well. That's sort of what I want to look at and understand, where do I want to go in terms of overall length in the magazine, and then get the barrel cut to suit that. So that's sort of where I'm heading with that.
Yeah, and I think, given the pretty short or relatively short length of the round you've chosen, it kind of gives you a lot more to play with. A lot of the magazine systems are based on a 308 length, and so you're sort of limited if that's the length of the round you're using, but given you go on a shorter cartridge, you often got quite a bit more to play with. But again, there's a lot more of discussion topics there, so...
Yeah, cool. I think we'll schedule that one in. That would be very good. Now, something else. I mean, if that's the end of your update, Greg.
Yes,
else?
mate. Yeah, that's pretty much a summary of what's going on.
Cool, mate. Now, something else I saw this morning actually was from Applied Ballistics, which is what Bryan Litz is heavily involved with. He put up a post. I'll read it word for word. I'm taking suggestions for research topics that we can explore and publish. Primarily, the intent is to identify some content for the next volume of the Modern Advancements in Long-Range Shooting series. Any suggestions can be considered, even beyond the scope of that series, though. Here's some content that's planned for the next volume to give you an idea of what we're doing. Exploring dispersion, 1 MOA groups at 100 yards and half MOA groups at 200 yards. Rimfire ballistics. Muzzle velocity and BC test results for many common rimfire types out of various length and twist barrels. Pointing and trimming bullets. Effects on uniformity and magnitude of BC. If you have an idea for a test that you've always liked to see done, please reply with ideas. We always try to do relevant work, meaning topics shooters are most interested in. No better way to do that than taking input directly from the shooters. Thanks, Brian. So, I guess two things. One, if anyone listening actually has something that they want tested by a ballistician in fairly controlled circumstances, Brian's known for doing very extensive testing on anything he challenges. Jump on Applied Ballistics Facebook and find that post and get back to them with your ideas. The other one that's on there that I'm really interested to see, because I've been following his results on it for a little while, is that the dispersion, where it's a good group at 100 but an even better group at 200 or 300, because a lot of people claim that, and I don't think he's ever been able to prove it, despite putting an offer out there to the rest of the world to come and try. But anyway, that's one thing I'm interested in, and also to be exploring the rimfire side of things a little bit more, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm aware that Brian and I think at least one or two other people had been involved in fairly extensive testing of a whole bunch of different rimfire ammo to actually accurately establish BCs, and therefore accurately be able to plot your trajectories with the rimfire rather than just basically guessing.
Hoping.
Which is once you've shot it enough, you could have a fair idea, but being able to actually plot that in through a ballistic program and and utilise it. So
would be excellent. Yeah,
and that's the thing with 22. It's such a great training calibre.
Mm.
You know, you can go out there and plink all day for pocket change, and learn. You know, and they're heavily affected by wind, so you got to get good your wind calls, all that sort of good stuff. So great calibre.
I think that post that Bryan put up is going to be hopefully bring up some really interesting topics, not only for sort of his investigation, but also for general discussion.
Sure. Yeah.
So I'd be really interested to see what our listeners have got to say on any particular topic they might want to hear about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I mean, I would suggest people, if they've got something, certainly get on Applied Ballistics Facebook and ask it directly with them.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll share the post on our Facebook, but don't reply to us because we'll just look at it and go, yeah, it's a good idea. Make sure you jump across to the Applied Ballistics Facebook and reply to them because they actually will do something about it. Yeah, which is it's good to see them actually out there asking shooters what they want to see. It's very good to see.
Absolutely.
So the topic tonight that we've been talking about or saying that we're going to discuss is scopes. Now, I've got a feeling that this is one of those topics that we're not going to cover tonight in total because there is way too much detail going on with scopes. Greg, you had a question that was going to prompt the night, which I thought was really good.
Yeah, and from my perspective, I'm not hugely up the learning curve in terms of scope technology, I guess, and advances. And the first question that comes to me is, what scope do I need? And then, I hunt as well as I long-range shoot. So what's a scope that best suits a not so longer-range hunting environment, let's say 400 metres on foxes, and what's a better scope if I had a rifle that was focused on, let's say, 1,200 metre or 1,000 metre plus gong shooting. So I guess that's my question is, what sort of options do I need to think about between those two scenarios? Because what you need for one, you don't necessarily need for the other.
Sure, certainly. And I guess that's going to assume, remember we talked fairly early on that every time you're compromising your gun, if you're trying to do multiple things with one gun, the cartridge itself, the gun it's set up itself is always going to be compromised. Well, there's probably no truer point than the scope is going to be the same situation, where if you're going to go down more of the close-in range hunting type style of setup, you probably don't need the type of scope that you would need if you're going to shoot 1,000 metres consistently. But that doesn't actually answer your question. Sorry, Greg. It's
no. Well, I mean, I think that's it's an interesting point, and I think it's maybe 10 or 20 years ago that would have been absolutely true. A lot of the scopes, if we look at what's being used successfully in competitions and that sort of thing, they are actually a really versatile scope. And
yes, no doubt.
In keeping with the series, the Precision Rifle Blog series on what these successful shooters are using.
Yep.
A lot of the scopes are fairly, they're not just high-end magnified, like real high-end magnification. They're,
sure.
They can, a lot of the stages are not necessarily all 1,000-yard plus stages.
Yep.
So a lot of the stages can simulate, a 300 to 400 metre shot on a fox when you don't have a lot of time. And yet they've also got the versatility to really stretch out further. So I think scope technology's come a long way. We are spoilt for choice now.
Amazingly so,
more than ever before.
Absolutely. There's and scopes is something I really enjoy, and I've been through lots of different scopes and tried many different things, but certainly no expert in it. I know what I've tried, and I've enjoyed some of them, and some of them I've moved on. And but there's a few questions that I always get asked through the training stuff we do, through the shop I work at, and perhaps a couple of them we could discuss to try and narrow a few things down. So one of the big ones I get asked all the time is first focal plane or second focal plane. Andrew, do you want to cover off the difference?
Well, I guess the sort of the primary difference is, like a first focal plane scope, your reticle stays the same size in relation to the target. So if you're winding your power up, and you've got a reticle that has graduations for in minutes of angle or in mils, those graduations stay the same. which is a huge advantage if you're using your reticle to either hold for wind or for elevation.
Sure. Yep.
As opposed to a second focal plane scope where if you wind the magnification up, the image gets bigger, but basically the relationship between the image and the reticle changes. So
yes,
you can't just, if you want to hold for, use your reticle as a either windage or elevation holds, it has to be on a specified power. It can't be on any power.
Yes. Yep.
So depending on the application, I mean, both scopes can be perfectly suited for whatever application. But I think in a lot of the sort of the tactical, even hunting, long range hunting type situations, it's pretty easy to forget what power you're on at the heat of the moment. I mean, I've missed shots where I've gone hold 4 minutes or whatever, and I've gone, okay, I was on 32 power rather than 22 power and shot way over the top. So
missed completely. Yeah. Yeah, and look, I often sort of suggest that if you're going to be adjusting your magnification commonly through your hunting or your long range shooting or target shooting, whatever it is, if you're going to be changing your magnification a reasonable amount and using your reticle to give any adjustments at all, then I'd always go the first focal plane option. So if you're like with some of the types of shooting we do, where you're doing multiple still gongs, multiple different distances, and you actually are adjusting either holding differently or you're winding your power up, the first focal plane's a no-brainer. If you're going to be sitting at a fixed location, a fixed distance for the day, you're shooting whatever it is, and you're going to be on 25 power or 30 power or something, and that's it, and you're pretty much going to be dialing everything, then I think the money would be wasted on a first focal plane. The second focal planes usually are cheaper, generally speaking. And so if you want to be on 30 power and you're not really that worried about using your reticle that much, I'd stay with the second focal plane quite comfortably.
Yeah, I mean, even guys that are, say, long range, varmint shooting rabbits and crows and that sort of thing, and they're dialing everything.
Yeah.
I know guys that dial everything and they do well. I know guys that hold and they do well. So if you're dialing everything, it really doesn't matter.
It negates it, yeah.
But if you're using your reticle for anything, whether it be elevation or wind, it's really a big advantage.
Absolutely.
And it is dependent on the reticle. I mean, I've seen some first focal plane reticles that when they're dialed down to the lowest magnification, they're not particularly usable. They appear too small in a field of view.
That's very true, yep.
But I think, again, the advancements in the scopes we've got now, a lot of the major manufacturers, the reticles are good. They're usable at all power ranges and they're designed well. So,
well, the flip side of that is if you dial too far up, you can, particularly with older reticles, and I've seen the newer ones certainly sort of don't seem to do this, but the older ones were a little bit too thick when you're on maximum power, and you actually block out what target you're shooting at. You can't see it anymore. Most of my first focal plane stuff now doesn't have that issue, which is excellent, but it certainly is something prevalent, or certainly years ago it was prevalent. Cool. I think have we done that to death, Greg? Are you looking at us bored?
Yeah, no.
Pretty much. We'll move on.
Yeah, right.
Cool. The other question that's pretty common is MIL and MOA. Which one's... The question I usually get is which one's better?
I think it's a pretty difficult question to answer empirically. I think it depends on what you're trained on and what you're comfortable with. To me, I mean, I've always used MOA, but in recent times, I've sort of seen the advantages of MIL. Being in a metric sort of society, we're used to tenth-based system, and for me, the advantage of having a scope that is, particularly in most mil radian scopes are 0.1 of a mil.
Yes. Yep.
So it's 1 click is 1 centimetre, 100 metres. It's very easy to extrapolate that out to whatever range.
Yes.
It's quick and easy.
Yep.
But I think it really depends. I mean, I've seen plenty of guys that are very experienced on the MOA system, and they're just as fast, and they can just as quickly make corrections. So,
yeah, Greg, you can.
Yeah, I'm much the same as Andrew in that I started with MOA, and as soon as I hit MIL, it was just easy for me. Being a metric head, I just found MIL's just very, very simple. I can easily calculate at any distance what 1 click is worth in centimetres. I just find it a natural way of doing things.
Yep.
Whereas MOA, it's not meaningful to me. To be able to calculate what's a click worth at 936 metres, I can't do that in my head, but I can with mils.
Well, I think it's interesting. I think a lot of guys that use the MOA system, they look at a target or look at their fall of shot and they give a correction in inches.
Yep.
And it's a close correlation, but it's not it's not exactly
it's
correct.
Not exact, yeah.
So
it is quite close. I guess I learnt on MOA and I got fairly experienced with MOA, and I made the conscious decision to sell all my tactical scopes in MOA and buy everything replaced in mil, and I did that because I was teaching guys who had mil scopes, and I was finding myself lagging behind a little bit, that I wasn't quite on the ball. If they had an MOA scope, I could just say, oh, this is this is how you fix whatever problem, or this is how much adjustment to give it, sort of off the top of my head, because I knew the system fairly well. And so I've made a conscious effort to get rid of all the MOA tactical style scopes that I had and buy mil. And that's been a very interesting learning curve of not really having a choice of dealing with MOA anymore, of dealing with mil, because we get guys to come out in the courses with both, and so it's advantageous to know both, and my understanding of mil has grown extensively over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think another thing too, a lot of people make a decision on basically what a mil click is worth in MOA. So, obviously one click of MOA is worth 0.25 of a MOA, but 1 mil click is worth, it's greater than that. I'm not sure what it is. Anyone know? It's about 0.28 or something like that?
I mean, one
MOA?
No, it'd be
or is it 0.3 something?
Yeah, I mean, it's 1 centimetre, so at 100 metres versus about 6 point something millimetres. So it's coarser, and that's another interesting point. I've heard people say, the MOA, particularly the target-based MOA scopes, you've usually got, say, an 1/8 MOA.
Yes.
Which is considerably finer.
Sure.
And depending on the discipline, target shooting guys, if they're shooting a score match where they've got to shoot a target, like some of the closer range bench rest type shoots are shot for score, not group size.
Yep.
So for them to be able to really accurately dial their zero, it's maybe advantageous. But
makes sense.
I guess when you run the figures, if you're say shooting, maybe a 10-inch gong at 1,000 yards or whatever it might be.
That's right. Mils.
So, it's the difference is so minute, really.
Yes.
That it's irrelevant.
And I think also that if you're going that way with it and you're saying, well, MOA is finer adjustments, is also technically a slower adjustment then, because you've got more adjustments to make, more clicks to make to get to the same point. So if you are competing in a more tactical style match where you're against the clock and not, you've got 10 minutes to complete your shots, it's not 10 minutes, is you got to set your time based on how quickly you can complete it. I guess every little thing counts, and so if you're taking 10 less clicks to get to your resolution, then you're slightly in front. Now with you could argue the point there, and I'm not sure that will win you a match, but
and I guess
it's something to consider.
Yeah, the other point to make is when we compare an MOA click against a mil click, the most you'll ever be out is half a click value. The most you'll ever be away from
a true zero.
From a true accurate zero. So that reduces it even further again.
Well, that depends on what scope you use, though, because the Gen 2 from the Vortex, when you set that with a mil or MOA, it's not actually based on clicks. You set it to perfect zero and lock it down.
Really?
It doesn't have clicks.
Didn't know that exists.
But again, real world.
Anyway, yes. I'm
real world.
Just being pedantic with you, Greg. There.
No, that's groovy. I didn't even know that technology existed.
My favourite elevation turret there is.
Having said that, I mean, that's a good idea, and the way they've done it works, but real world advantage?
Yeah, nothing.
Well, having said that, it is also the top scope
well, that's true.
in the Precision Rifle series.
That's
I don't think that
I'm not sure that would make it, no.
I think the overall scope.
Yeah, but it's a funky feature. I like it, and I think it's very very cool. Cool. So I guess to summarise mil or MOA, go with whatever you know the best, or whichever one you do decide, get to know it really well. And you can't go wrong. If you know your system really, really well, you can't go wrong.
Like I think you said, Sam, regarding sort of getting rid of all of say, your MOA scopes and going mill, I think whatever you choose, you really need to stick with that system. If you're chopping
Agreed.
and changing between, types, you can confuse yourself really easily.
Very quickly, and certainly I'm not advocating selling all your scopes and buying them in the different setup. I did that out of a conscious decision to learn the other side of the fence, so to speak. Not advocating that was not overly smooth and easy. That was pretty painful to go through when I knew the other system so well, but I guess I did it for a reason.
Yeah, and I'll just add, because I made this mistake. Don't buy a mixed unit scope. Oh my God, don't do that to yourself.
Great point, Greg. So clarify what you're saying there.
Yeah, well, when I was early on in my scope buying career, I bought a inches per 100 yard turret scope with a mil dot reticule. And so I've got these mixed units that it's just, impossible to use. Even if you run the zoom at a calibrated level,
yes,
you're getting feedback in mil, but you've got to translate that to inches per 100 yards. And it really messes with your head.
So to clarify that, I guess that there is actually a third type of angular measurement, mil, MOA, and inches per 100 yard, which is true inch per 100 yard, rather than MOA, which is slightly different. An inch per 100 yard is really not regarded as... you see that on the cheaper hunting scopes usually.
Yeah, correct.
But the point there is don't get a mil adjustment with an MOA reticle or... an MOA reticle, MOA adjustment or mil reticle.
The most common I've seen is mil dot reticle with MOA turrets, and multiple manufacturers do that.
Well, that was a United States Marine Corps standard for some reason. Yeah, they did that as a standard.
Yeah, and it's sort of...
they do everything in mils, their navigation and everything. So to throw that in is the MOA is a bit odd.
I think they've gone away from it now. I believe
it's all changed.
I think it's all mil, and it makes a world of sense. I mean, there's no valid reason to go with a mix and match. But
no, because you're getting wrong data, and anyway, you've got more calculations to do.
So basically, the long and short is whatever system you use, make sure your turrets match your reticle. Basically,
absolutely. Cool. So another question that often is asked is elevation versus magnification. So people seem to think that the further you shoot, the higher magnification you should get. So if you're trying to shoot a 2 kilometre shot, you should get a 50 power scope. And if you're trying to shoot a 3 kilometre shot, you should get an 80 power scope. Andrew, you want to clarify perhaps?
Well, I guess there's a couple of issues there. One is normally, I mean, generally speaking, there are exceptions, but if you were to get a 50 or an 80 power or something like that, the elevation range you've got is normally reduced
compared
to say a 5 to 25 or thereabouts.
Yep.
I mean, there are exceptions to that.
Of course.
I believe what the Bushnell XRS, which is a 4.5 to 30, has on paper more elevation than the 3.5 to 21.
Yep.
Marginally, very small difference. Which is normally speaking, you would expect the higher the magnification, the less internal adjustment you've got.
Yeah, that's usually.
And that comes down to space in the tube, doesn't it? Basically.
I'm not a scope technician, so I can't really say. I think there's a couple of other issues as well. But I mean, from a user's perspective, I've used really high magnification scopes, and what you lose with them is field of view. And if you're shooting 2,000 yards or meters plus, you need to be able to see what's happening. You got no chance of following your trace, your projectile trace through the air because it's way out of your field of view. And if you were using an 80 power, you may well not even see your fall of shot if you're off to the side or up or down. So
yeah, and I guess the type of shooting we're talking about, we have been for a number of weeks now, is really that. I don't like the word tactical, but I guess that describes it. People know what you're talking. Practical, yeah. The long range shooting, the precision shooting, multiple target, maybe shorter time frames. That sort of type of shooting, hunting derived, long range precision shooting, and I guess for that type of shooting, it's pretty common, and if you were to look at the results from that latest precision rifle or the current precision rifle blog scope test, that the majority of scopes there are going to be in that 20 to 30 magnification range.
Top end, you mean?
Top
Yep.
end, yeah. And the reason for that is that that's a very practical magnification to use, so you get good field of view around your target, you get good amount to be able to see your wind and your fall of shot and your everything else. You'll still be able to see all of these factors while you're still able to actually quarter up your target. You can work out where to put that reticle on either the target or off to the side if you're going to hold for windage. It also allows you to have enough elevation in your scope to be able to make the distances you're going to be required to make, assuming you majority of cases you're going to have like a 20-minute or a 40-minute rail base, something like that is what I was trying to say, on top of the rifle as well. And so you're right what you're saying before, Andrew, is that your offset of a high magnification scope is usually a limited elevation range, and there is technical reasons as to why that is, and it is a fair amount to do with the inner tube, but not
how far your erector tube can move, basically.
Yeah,
I mean, some of the modern scopes, are going larger and larger tube size.
Well, this is another discussion, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely.
And that's for a number of reasons. Increases field of view, but also gives you more room physically in there. So, I mean, and another, keeping in with the the long range hunting / multiple targets at varying ranges kind of shooting.
Yep.
If you're running an 80 power, you've got such a small field of view. If you've got to try and pick up a target, say from 300 metres,
yep,
all of a sudden out to 800 metres quickly, and speed is of the essence. You've got to try and find it.
It's not a practical setup.
No, and you would find yourself not using that high end. If say 80 power is your top end, you would find yourself down a lot lower than that. So,
absolutely. I mean, I've got one scope that is a 55, I think, 50, let's say 50 power, and that's on a particular gun that's designed to target shoot to 300 meters, 400 meters, and let's clarify that at 300, 400, or 2, 3, 4, 500, those really high magnification scopes are actually quite useful because there's not a lot of other factors. There's less interference with some of the other factors. Usually you can still see the wind from the naked eye to 200 meters, maybe 300 meters. You don't need the scope to be able to do that. And you are trying to put it on the exact same point of the paper as your last one. You're shooting for groups or you're shooting for score. And so a 50 power scope is actually quite useful and beneficial for that type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's all relevant. I mean, you've got to keep in mind, if you were to look at the equipment used by, say, the top F-class shooters, you would find a lot of these higher powered, like higher magnification scopes in use because they don't have the same requirements of the scope that, these, the top level shooters in the precision rifle series are going to be needing. I mean, it's horses for courses.
Sure.
So if somebody was to ask you what's the best scope, it's a pretty open-ended question. You need to ask a lot more question than that. So
yeah, a lot more clarification around it. Greg, have you bought a scope recently, or what are you actually? We know a fair bit about what the project is that you're doing with your 6x47. What scope are you intending to put on that?
Yeah, okay. So,
or you haven't covered that yet?
No, I haven't covered that, but I do have a scope for it.
Yep.
I bought a Bushnell Tactical Elite XRS. So
yes.
That's my long-range scope, if you like.
Sure. And
that's going to go on to the 6x47. So, yeah, I'm pretty happy with that scope. I haven't really used it much, to be honest.
No.
I've bought it and I've fired a few shots, but that's about it. But I chose a fairly simplistic reticule because I guess that's what we're going to talk about shortly is the different reticule choices.
Yep.
Mine's a fairly simplistic, that G2, I think it's G2.
Yep, the reticule. G2 reticule from Bushnell.
Yeah, yep.
Sure.
So I've gone for a fairly uncluttered reticule, although you'll see in the Precision Rifle blog they talk a lot more about, that grid-style reticule at the bottom, which is fairly common in these scopes that have been that are in the popular Precision Rifle blog.
Yeah.
But I've got that scope, pretty happy with it, keen to use it.
Yep.
actually, a lot of my scopes are Bushnell Tactical Elite scopes. So
Here comes the plug.
Yeah, it's the plug. Now, I think probably the only point I want to bring out is, they might not have the high-end, I guess, optical clarity that a lot of these scopes have, but from an affordability point of view and a functionality point of view, I think they're a really good entry-level scope in terms of just getting out there and shooting without breaking the bank. So I certainly see that as a sort of a really good start point for a decent scope on a long-range rifle.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. I've got the same scope, but I've got the Horus H59 scope, which is one of those cluttered, gridded reticles that you're talking about. We'll talk about reticles shortly, I guess, but in terms of back to the Bushnell Elite series, they came in number 4 on the Precision Rifle blog in terms of what they were using in PRS in the last year, which indicates that they're a very good scope and they're well priced. And perhaps they're not as optically good as the ones that have beaten them, which is probably why the ones that have beaten them have. But in terms of reliability, that scope for me, I've been using it for a few years now, has never missed a beat, but never missed a click, which is critical.
Yeah, I think that sort of brings up the topic of what is a desirable, a critical feature, I guess, and for me personally, mechanical reliability and repeatability is probably the most important point.
Yes, agreed.
And I mean, for a scope to make it into the top 5 of that list, it's got to be, extremely solid.
It's a contender, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and probably from my perspective too, I don't have a lot of disposable income for scopes, so you sort of I get to
spend it all on barrels.
I spend it all on barrels and actions and stuff. Just don't tell the wife.
And cameras, that's right.
And cameras and going shooting and the big thing for me is when I go to spend money, I look at scopes and I go, well, you get to this point of diminishing returns. So like, you get to this point where it's like, that's a good solid functional scope, and that's where I see the Bushnell Tactical Elites. And then from there you get these optic improvements, but it costs you a lot of money to get these small jumps in performance. And I just see it as, in terms of bang for buck, nice pun, but it's diminishing returns. You've got to spend so much more money for this, what I perceive as a reasonably small improvement.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that my experience is it's you can look through a $4,000 to $5,000 scope, and optically, you'll definitely pick a difference between that and a Bushnell.
Yep.
Is it enough that it's going to cause you issue?
Is it going to make you miss a shot?
I think no. I don't think I would have ever said, gee, I'm not able to make that shot because I didn't have a $5,000 piece of glass on my rifle. I guess if money's no object,
sure.
Why wouldn't you go with that?
Yeah.
But the reality is, if you've got a scope that tracks reliably, is for me the critical one. If you're dialing up and down, if you haven't got a scope that tracks reliably and repeatably, then
chuck it out. Yeah.
It might be a nice hunting scope where you set it and don't touch any of your adjustments. But in what we're talking about, mechanical reliability, I think is the key, is the first point.
Sure.
I've seen high-end scopes that don't track reliably and repeatably.
Yep.
And I've also seen, like the Bushnells, which are, in some cases are half the price of some of the higher-end scopes.
Yep.
And yet they're solid. I mean, I ran Greg's XRS through a tracking test.
Yeah, it tracked really well.
And it tracked around a 1200 millimeter piece of cardboard perfectly.
Actually, we tracked a Zeiss the other week, a Zeiss Conquest HD, I reckon, and that was one of the best tracking scopes I've seen, and that's a $1,200 scope. Now, it struggled a little bit with elevation as the day went on and tried to push it further and further, but its tracking was sensational.
Yeah, and that, to me, to have that confidence, to know that if you dial as a given amount, it's actually going to adjust that much.
Sure. Yeah.
It's confidence instilling, and I mean, you were there when we witnessed a particular, I think it was an 8.5 to 25 Leopold.
Yeah, 24, 24.
I think it was 20. I think 8.5.
Yeah, whatever they are.
Yeah,
yes.
It was an expensive scope, and it happened to be
That was
fortunate.
Mark IV, that one.
Yeah, fortunately on a really really accurate rifle, and it was holding zero, no problem at all. But when we actually ran a box test on it, it was tracking 20% more than the dialed amount is what it had moved on target.
It tracked perfectly, but it was consistently 20% out.
Wow. So when you went to put real data as a calibration point for a calculator, it would have gone berserk. Like ballistic calculator, trying to calibrate that.
We didn't get to that point. I think we swapped it out.
We did some testing with him, and we had him out to about 800 metres, and we basically said,
right, we did. Yeah,
run the data you've got through the ballistic program, and then basically subtract 20% off that and dial it, and it was dead on.
In follow-up, though, to be fair, that did get sent back to the guys who bring Leopold in, and they replaced the scope. And it was the guy who owns the scope said that ever since it's been no problem at all, and he's done the same test, I believe, and it's been perfect. So that's good. It does happen. We understand that happens. I guess also not just to sit here saying Bushnell the best. I've got a Carls, which I'm very happy with, which I still haven't worked out how to pronounce, whether it's Carls or Carles or anyway. Someone will correct me on that, I'm sure. And that's one of the 624 eyes, which I'm wrapped with. It's probably the favourite scope I've had. Optically, it's really clear. Now we talked about before. I'm not gonna miss a shot because it was optically better than the Bushnell or not. But it tracks really, really well. It's got a little indicator that tells me if I'm on the first or the second rotation, which I really like. The zero stop is probably the easiest I've ever set. One thing I've got for you, though, Andrew, is if you're in a situation where the target you're trying to see or identify is very difficult to see, I think that's where an optical clarity could have the practical edge in the field. So if you're looking at, say, a relatively long distance and your target is very camouflaged per se, a better optical scope may actually bring that out better.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. And I think, for the vast majority of shooters, the occasions when that would be a very valid point would be quite rare.
I'm not disagreeing at all.
But definitely there. And look, from military type perspective, those guys have a different need. Often they need to identify facial features and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But that's again not a problem that's faced by many people.
No. I'm just looking for clarification.
It is like Greg said. You do get better performance, and there's no doubting that. But it's for percentage gains. The dollars you have to put into it
a lot more.
For guys that have got unlimited budget, well, why wouldn't you spend? Wouldn't you go out and buy a $4,000 to $5,000 scope that gives you?
Sure. Yeah. Why not?
I would. I just can't.
You just spent it all on barrels. Get
another Visa card.
Excellent. One of the other things that we haven't quite covered off yet is reticles. Now, reticle design, I guess, is something that's come a long way over the last 20 years or so. You go back far enough, and all we had were sort of, just straight, literally crosshairs. And now you've got the Horus reticle, which I'm using at the moment. I guess perhaps reticles are almost their own discussion, really, aren't they? They're so in depth and dedicated. Yeah,
I think it's one of those things. There's a lot you could discuss, but there's at a sort of more brief level. It depends on what you want to do, really. If you're looking at a practical type environment, whether it be hunting or whether it be field competition type target shooting, if time is of the essence, a lot of the newer reticles like the Horus and some of the the Tremor reticles and that sort of thing, they've got a lot. They look very busy for a lot of people when you look through them, and I think
I was in I said the exact same thing when I first got it. I didn't choose it specifically with that reticle. It just happened to fall in front of me, really good deal, and I had that reticle and I bought it. And but I made a decision early on to learn that reticle and get used to it. And now a gridded reticle is going to be hard for me to go away from because you've got so many you learn to look through the reticle, and you learn to look actually what's on the other side of it quite easily. And you've got so many options for holding wind, holding drop, and small adjustments. And also the second shot correction is so quick because you see where
you got reference points more
Yeah.
at the point. And I think with even a say a mil dot reticle or that style of reticle, which gives you windage and elevation crosshairs with graduations on them.
Yep.
If you're say dialing elevation but holding wind, you could be holding, or if you're doing a combination of both, you could be holding in dead sort of area of the reticle where there's no
dead space.
Dead
so to
space.
speak. Yeah. Isn't that right, Greg?
Yeah,
Blank space.
Blank space.
But what it's you're not holding precisely. Whereas if you've got a reticle that gives you direct, accurate hold points,
hold against, yeah.
and particularly if you've got a spotter who's either using a rifle with that same reticle in their scope or a spotting scope with the same reticle, it's so fast.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're zeroed and the spotter is good, he can give you reference calls for hold here, and
instantly. Yeah.
you don't even have to touch the elevation or the windage turrets. You can be bang onto it instantly. And a lot of that, I think a lot of the military guys have been using it for a long time, and they train, and they're really fast and efficient, and it's sort of flowing on now to this target shooting civilian kind of market in a fairly big way.
Absolutely. I think reticles is probably another full discussion to have. I guess to cover very briefly, you've got your duplex style reticles, your more traditional sort of hunting reticles. A lot of people think they give you 1 point of aim. I'd argue they'd give you at least 5. You could use. Greg's just give me that look. There is certainly a way to apply a duplex reticle and actually get a lot more out of it than what it looks like. And I remember I've seen guys where I've shown them how to get that out of a reticle, and they've just gone, "Oh wow, I didn't realise this. I thought it was a useless option." It's not perhaps ideal because you're making it work for you. Then they've got the BDC type reticles, the bullet drop compensators, so they've got hash marks and that sort of gear that give you an indication of how high to hold, or the windage elevation mark, or the windage marks as well. And then you've got the grid style reticles as well, which give you that full pattern, the Christmas tree reticles as they're often called, that go all the way down the scope and give you left and right hand elevation. And look, I think I'm now actually going more towards the grid style reticles, but the straight BDC style stuff is quite good as well.
I know I've got the Christmas tree style reticles for hunting, and I really like those for hunting because I do a lot of red light stuff.
Is this an income stream we didn't know about, Greg?
Yes, well,
right.
So I do a lot of low light conditions.
We'll be buying scopes, no dramas.
So I do a lot of low light conditions. I like to have a good field of view around that particular fox. But now that I'm, doing a lot more shooting at gongs, I definitely like the grid style for that. So if I bought that XRS again tomorrow, I wouldn't buy it with the same reticle. I'd buy it with the grid style because I know it's going on my gong gun.
Right.
And the hunting style guns, I'd like that nice clean style. So, that's just, I bought it probably a bit early.
Yep.
So
I think it's one of those things as well, being familiar with the reticle. I've seen, a reticle that a shooter we all know here uses it on a Night Force scope as an early reticle. To me, it's one of those ones that you look at it and go, wow, that's doesn't make a lot of sense.
I know the one. Yeah, he sold it actually, but
but he loves it, and he was intimately familiar with that. Knows everything about it.
And you get if you know it, you're going to be unstoppable with it.
Yeah, and I think to look through, the more complex a reticle is, the more critical it is that that reticle. If you put a shooter behind a complex sort of Horus reticle or Tremor reticle that's never seen that before, they're going to look at it and go,
"It's too busy. I can't see the thing."
But you put someone behind it that really understands it and they're fast and accurate with it.
Yeah, and that's probably one for the listeners is get on the different manufacturer sites, and on their sites they have detailed descriptions of all the reticules and what information's provided on them. I know when I read about the Horus one, I was go, wow, it tells you that, and it's got markers for, moving targets and all sorts of stuff that I didn't even recognise by looking at the reticule itself. So yeah, definitely get on the manufacturers' websites and just look at their write-ups on the different reticules.
Cool. All right. Well, we're running out of time pretty quickly. So, look, I'm sure we'll talk more about scopes in future episodes because scopes are just a continual. They're an evolution of information that keeps coming out, and more stuff is designed around them. But also that we've only covered a small portion of what actually is going on with scopes. So, but we do have a question from a listener, from Will. And his question is it good or bad to have a scope that picks up a lot of glare/mirage? Now, I clarified with Will which one he meant, and he was talking about mirage because I guess we'd all generally agree that glare's perhaps not a great thing, and you can do things to try and reduce that and put a sunshade on and those sort of things to try and reduce the glare. So let's take that question as though, is it a good or bad to have a scope that picks up a lot of mirage?
Well, I think... we'd all be in agreement that the better a scope can, and the more clearly a scope can see mirage,
yep,
the more beneficial it is. It actually allows you to use that mirage, what the information you're getting from it, to tell what your wind's doing, first and foremost. And I think we spoke about it, Greg, how a cheaper scope it's really poorly defined. You don't get a lot of clarity as to what the mirage is doing. It's just general kind of murkiness.
Yeah, that's right. It's not as... Well, for me, it's not as defined. Like, looking at a lot of the high-end scopes, and there's just a lot of crispness to the mirage, and you can really pick what it's doing. And it's very readable. Whereas the cheaper scopes, it's just more like just a foggy haze.
Yeah, and I think personally, like if you've got a really good scope that allows you to sort of utilise and use your parallax turret to sort of see what the mirage is doing at varying ranges, it gives you a fair idea, not exact, but a fair idea of at what ranges the wind is changing, for example, that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise. If you had a cheaper scope that didn't allow you to see that, you would be guessing. You might not sort of see that sort of maybe between 700 and 800 metres, you've got a change in the wind direction that you can only see because you're able to see that mirage clearly.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's good. The more you can see that mirage, the easier it is going to be, or it helps with reading your wind. And it's not necessarily the be-all, end-all way of doing it, but it certainly is advantageous, and it's better information to have it clear and precise than it is to not have it and not be able to understand what's happening with it.
Well, I would think just generally speaking that the better quality optics a scope has, the more it will allow you to see that. Really. Yeah,
and certainly while we're talking about it, for those that haven't tried it, if you're out on the range, you've got a target a fair way away, just roll your parallax, from the target focus, roll it through the focus back to as far as you can, and then back out to your target. And you can, if you do it slowly and look at the mirage, you can just see what the wind's doing in between you and the target, and that's what Andrew's referring to. And then from that, you can sort of, when you do your wind call, you can sort of average it out a bit better. It gives you a bit more information to just give yourself an average wind call. So
absolutely. Well, I think we've certainly gone longer than we had intended to, so hopefully that's full of interesting information. If not, hopefully there's some good gags in there. So thanks for listening, guys. Check out our sponsors for this episode, which is southernshooters.com.au. And if you go out to one of the long-range days, perhaps you see one of us there, I imagine, talking about wind and scopes and everything else we've blabbered on about. So thanks for listening. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with an episode on barrels. Cheers, guys. Thanks for coming in.
No worries.
No worries.
Thanks for listening to the Precision Shooting Podcast. To continue the discussion, check out our Facebook page. And for more information, head to our website, www.precisionshootingpodcast.com.au. This episode was brought to you by Impact Dynamics, advanced training for the precision shooter.